Hey guys, it's a philosopher. Welcome to another episode of FGC Philosophy. I've got a familiar face. He's been on quite a few times already. He's back again. We got Joe Monday, author of Gief's Gym, the moderator for the Street Fighter Reddit. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hello, hi. There's more to speak on that, but
go ahead.
That's more like unannounced stuff that hasn't really. I don't know. We just haven't really talked about it or formed like our quote unquote messaging on that. But the head mod actually is taking a step back, and now I think I'm going to take that. I'm going to fill that role now and probably make a little bit of changes. Like the first change automatically was the drop down calendar now shows like all FGC events. Pretty much like anything that's listed in the Twitter account FGC Cal's FGC calendar, all of that shows up on the drop menu. I think it's like a 2-week look ahead, but that's like step one. And there's a couple other changes that are coming, but that's that news.
So let me ask you this then. What is new with you? I know you released some things since the last time we talked, some supplementals. Can you go into details about that?
I can. So what was released was the Gief's Gym character supplements, which the biggest complaint about Gief's Gym was that there wasn't any. It was all based on Ryu because it made sense for me. If I'm just going to use one character, might as well use the characters on the box, and it just makes sense. And he was capable of doing most, if not all, of the. He was capable of doing all of the things, if not like particularly well. He could do all of the lessons to teach you how to play fighting games, but everyone was like, "I don't want to play Ryu," and I was like, "Guess what? I don't either." So what I did was I went through and for every single character, basically formed lessons that are pretty much exactly. Some characters, let's say, excel in some areas where others do not. Like, I can't think of specific examples at this point. For example, canceling into specials, let's say, or canceling a special into critical art, right? Zangief can't do that. So that section, instead of not having anything, it was like, well, here's a little bit of extra information on how to maybe combo into critical art, because you have to do it a little bit differently with him. And there's a whole variety of little things like that where some lessons are slightly tweaked. But for the most part, if you want to play any character and you want to go through Gief's Gym, you can now do that with pretty much any character up to Manat. I haven't done Zeku yet, but he's also been available for like 24 hours or less than. Not even 24 hours at the time of this recording. So I'll get to that in a little bit. That one will probably be a headache because it's basically 2 characters. Technically 3 if you try and work them both together, which I eventually will, and it's going to be a headache. But the book itself, though, is... I think the biggest caveat with the book is that people often say, well, this isn't necessarily how you would even want to play this character, to which I say, I don't even think Gief's Gym is a good way to learn how to play Ryu. It really only exists to teach you at least the mentality of what you should be looking for in certain things, like when you would want to look for a frame trap, when you would want to try and bait a throw, what you're looking for in the neutral, like your normals and stuff like that. That's really where the bulk of Gief's Gym information actually is, and it's not in the practical lessons. There's a practicality to learning fighting games, of learning your certain combos and like learning your links and learning your cancels, all that stuff. That's important to fighting games, but the knowing why, knowing how is also equally important, if not more important, is that you should be thinking about it and thinking about different ways on how to apply those lessons. But yes, so Gief's Gym Character Supplements is out. Get it on Amazon like the other books. I have that process streamlined. And the next thing coming from Gief's Gym is I'm probably gonna have the 3rd edition ready by AE, when AE comes out, if not slightly after that. I haven't quite worked on the timing, but I'm almost finished with the additional lessons that I wanted to add to the 3rd edition of Gief's Gym.
What's been the initial response with people playing with their character, reading Gief's Gym? Have you gotten any feedback about that yet?
It filled the role that it needs to, I think. And pretty much anyone who wants to learn fighting games and then has a preference of character, they have that option now. I want to say it was a lot of work put into it for less of a return, because the lessons themselves are more important. The book, like Gief's Gym itself, is more important than the supplements. The supplements is just, you should have both in hand. Whenever you are looking at the supplements, the actual lesson should be over here, because the purpose of the lessons is not found in the supplements. It's basically, what's the word I'm looking for? When you have, like, I don't know if you have, like, been to a library in a long time, but, like, when you look at a set of encyclopedias, there's usually one book that is like, here's your reference, here's where you can find this word you're looking for, or the information you're looking for. It's found in this volume encyclopedia, found on this page of this other book. So you have to book to go look at another book. And that's kind of what the supplements is like. It's the book that you look at, so then you can go look in the other book to actually learn the thing.
One part, the supplemental part, is more of the proficiency side. That's the how-to, how to build upon this principle that you're trying to convey in Gief's Gym. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
The importance of understanding why to do something. It's something that I try to stress in my own beliefs, like for myself, in all areas of my life. And I think it's super important for Street Fighter or any fighting game, really. And I've come across people, and it's no judgment, it's just an observation, that people try to learn things, but sometimes they don't quite understand the reason why. So their execution or their proficiency, like to do combos and stuff, is really high, but their creative or critical thinking doesn't match that, so they can't really do too much with it. So I see a lot of skilled players losing because they know how to do a lot of the cool tech and stuff like that, or whatever, but they don't understand the lesson. Is that something that you come across? And then I guess, what is your take on that situation?
I would say that is absolutely true. And that's also this is not a new thing either. This has been going on for as long as I've tried to teach people how to play fighting games, which was like just about around when SF4 was like mid lifespan of Street Fighter 4. I was taking on, I think I started doing live lessons on when we were still back in RSF 4 for the subreddit, before we moved over to our Street Fighter. And even then, there was very clearly two sets of people. One type of person would take the lesson in stride. We would see something that they would do that was like wrong, or maybe they were a little too obvious with their pokes, and we would say, you are doing this specifically, and I know you're going to do it because you did that at the exact same range every time. You need to change that. Or they would ask, well, how do I chase down a backdash? And it's like, well, you do the jab OS suite. Very easy. It's a very simple option select. You do that. You don't have to worry about backdashes. Then there was the other people who I would continually teach the same lesson over and over again, but they never learned it. They might be able to perform long, exciting combos. They might have that technical proficiency of being able to do the combos. They might be able to anti-air. But they might not be able to position themselves right to anti-air. Like they could DP on reaction, but you're already over top of their head. So you hit them behind the neck, and then they're like, I DP'd. Why didn't I? And it's, my man, it's the range. It's just, you have to crosscut DP in that situation. And that lesson would just come up over and over again for certain players. So when you ask, is the purpose of the lesson more important than the execution? there's a big execution part of it. There were some players that just didn't have the execution to where it stops you from moving forward in a lesson, but there's definitely a mindset of, oh, I need to do this now, and I need to start applying this. And you could see the players that would come back the following week and then be able to perform on that again versus the other players who would not be able to.
In a nutshell, people who got it and people who didn't, like who got the lesson. Like, it's a very general term, but that's like the two categories that we're kind of talking about here.
The difference of, let's say, being able to play a classical instrument and being able to compose a piece of music. Some people didn't understand that what we were trying to teach them was how to compose, but all they wanted to play was that guitar solo from that Van Halen song they like, and it would never jive, and they didn't go anywhere. And actually, a lot of those players, they dropped out of the scene. I don't see them around anymore, or they just stopped playing altogether.
A bit tangential, but I want to go along with this music analogy because I think it's a really good one. I actually talked about this in a different context earlier in the week with somebody else. You know, there are people who can play music by ear, and there are people who can only play music like mechanically. They can read it, understand the theory of it, and then they repeat it. There's benefits to both, but I find that the happy medium between the two is where that really happens. And I think Street Fighter is kind of the same way. When you get to skill, not people who aren't getting it versus who are, but people who are like different play styles or different mentalities completely. You have people who are just like play it by ear. They can watch a combo, learn it, and adjust and do all these things. And then you have the other side where they have to have the tech and the numbers. Like they can play the game just by reading the frame data and understand it. And there are some people who are very great, but hardly even understand the concept of what frame data and animations even are.
I've definitely seen all three of the people that you're describing. Could I tell you which is best or which way to actually try and learn the game? I think people just learn differently. If you want to try and perform better, I would just say look at. I don't know. This one's a tough one to talk about because there are so many. Because I don't want to downplay someone's ability to learn a thing, mm-hmm. But what I'll say is this: there are certain caveats to those different styles of learning that I think players should pick up on and be aware of. For example, like you said, players who just look at frame data, and they want to learn just by looking at the numbers. Okay, that's fine. You can map out what you want to try and do, and you might be able to execute things, and you might think that here's what happens with those players is they'll see something and they'll go, oh, that's -4. I remember that's -4. I have this 4-frame move. I'll press it right now, and it'll whiff because they didn't look at the range. They didn't try it out before. They didn't actually practice it, and they go, wow, but it's -4. I should punch that every time. But it's like, my guy, you were way out of range, so that's why that happened. And they get frustrated because the numbers, they're lying to me. But no, you just didn't put it into practice. Sometimes, like, 2 + 2 does not equal 4. Sometimes you got a -1. That's 3. Quick maths. But those are the things that happen with players like that. That would happen pretty often. Or you would see the players who would never look at the frame data. There's players that just play it by ear. I've seen a lot of players like this too. And specifically when you would tell them, they might not, a lot of time those players don't even know. If you would ask them like what a frame trap is, they wouldn't be able to tell you. They would just say, oh, I hit the buttons and I saw that I hit you. But if you don't know why you would want to frame trap someone, then you don't quite understand. You don't have the palette available to you to select in your pressure of, well, maybe I should throw them this time to set up a frame trap later on. A lot of those players just would play it by gut instead of knowing what they were doing. I've actually seen, it's actually funny. Sometimes I've even said, I specifically remember one player, I won't call him out by name, where I was like, oh, that was a really good frame trap. He's like, oh, what? I'm like, no, you did a light move and then that was positive, and then you did something else that for big days. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, it's just look at the numbers. But a lot of that actually happened before frame data was widely available. That was the resources that players have to them today. It is fairly easy to, if you want to understand how to learn how to read frame data, that's available to you. You can find that out. That's not that difficult. So if you just need that someone to tell you, just take a look. You don't necessarily need to look at and know all of the frame data, let's say. Probably not at the level that you might be trying to play at, but here's just some certain things you want to pick up on. But to what you said earlier, I don't want to say that one way is bad over the other. I just want to say that there's certain caveats to learning solely one way versus trying to incorporate things that are more outside of your element, let's say. It's things that you're not used to can expand yourself as a player.
Sometimes your weak points are where your blind spots are, and it's really hard to notice those things, especially if you have a certain style. Like, I know people who can play music only by ear, and that, like, great people can learn really fast, but they have no creativity and no form of expression to it. And then I know people who can play it by ear. So there's people who can do one or the other, and there's benefits. But I definitely think a merging of the two benefits either side. But you can get to the top doing one or the other. So it's not really a matter of like which one's better than the other for me. It's just a matter of like being aware of it and using it to your advantage, because maybe you can get all the way to the top just exploiting the fact that you are very mechanic and just shutting out any of the learning by ear stuff and looking at the numbers, doing whatever it takes for you to learn, or vice versa. What we were talking about before, just practicing without really knowing the theory or the principle behind it, that lack of I guess competency, we'll say, disables you from being able to make it your own. Like, you can do it, and let me know where I am wrong, where I'm right, and where you disagree or whatever. But when you can do something, but you don't understand the competency, you really can't make it your own. So you can't, like, if you have a situation on the fly, you don't have that capacity to just be like, oh, I can do this specific thing. It's just, okay, here's my default state. This is what I'm going to do, rather than trying to create something new based off of like all the things that you put together.
I think that's when you're specifically talking about Street Fighter V trials, and pretty much not all trials, that's not true. But I think this is probably even more so true of, I think a more extreme case of this is MVCI trials. Have you played MVCI?
Yes, I have, and I played a few of the trials, yeah.
Okay. So you pretty much can recognize right away that I would say most all of the trials are pretty useless. They might be able to show you how one move can combo into another move, but in that game, you're character switching so often, or trying out different kinds of juggling your opponent differently than that game even would bring up, that if you just look at the trials and think about, that's all I can do, this is your combo map, then you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, you might win a couple matches, but you're limiting yourself in terms of combo options, especially in MVCI, when you should just be like trying to get a hit and then switching immediately into your actual big combo. That's an entirely different game, but the trials don't teach you how to play that game. They just kind of bring up certain options, and I feel like Street Fighter V's trials, for example, do a similar thing. Zeku's trials I kind of do that. I just did them a little bit ago, and it's not. That's hard to say for me, because I watched the Zeku stream before he was, what was it? Was it last week?
3 days ago.
Yeah, 3 days ago, the WSO stream for the Zeku breakdown. So I already kind of looked at that and knew which buttons would be cancelable. Thinking about it in my own head, well, how would I use that? What's the real combo mapping here? But even going through that and looking at that, how I typically do trials is I might see a special move and say, oh, I wonder if I can do this off of this special move, and just forget about actually doing the trial. So in the Zeka one, for example, it was the Strider mode EX Horizonto, where it's jump cancelable. And I thought, oh man, well, what What options are there off of a jump cancel? Can I get a certain setup off of this? Can I juggle him with another move in the air? Can I land first and do something else? I spent like a lot more time there. The answer ended up being, at least in the time I spent with it, like, no, you really can't. You kind of just have to go into the Bushin command grab. And I was like, well, that's a bit of a bummer. But I spent the time looking at it thinking, well, what if I could do something else off of this? And it's moments like that where you can, and this is more true in other fighting games, because there's some constraints in Street Fighter V, but I won't get into that, and at least in this conversation. But it's moments like that where you can look at your options differently and start painting a bigger picture with what a character is capable of based on the trials that you are presented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in that same note, my focus is usually on execution because it's fairly poor. Like I feel like I have a higher competency than a execution. So I tend to theory fight a lot more than I actually play. And so doing this, I had some difficulty. Like, and I remember finding out that I could jump cancel, but trying to figure out like the optimal way to execute it. So I was sitting here, and I realized that you can tap like after the first hit. I think from the Hizanto, the EX Hizanto, right?
Yeah.
Like you can just tap up instead of like I would normally just hold up very tensely and then try to like quickly do the circle because my input is terrible. My execution is terrible. So I realized I can just tap up and then he'll automatically. I can't cancel out of it. There's no way to cancel after I hit that up button after the warp time. And so then I can just simply do the quarter circle forward 2 punches, I think, and nail it. So I'm like, that's where my mind was trying to figure out how to simply do it because I'm that bad that I'm like searching for different execution shortcuts, so to speak, to make it easier on myself.
That you say that because my guttural instinct when I saw you have to jump cancel this was I would do the EX Hizanto and I would do a super jump. It was actually in that when I was practicing just moments ago when I did the jump cancel, I would always do a super jump by inputting down and then up is how typical super jump cancels are done. And then I was like, wait a minute, I probably like this game doesn't have super jumps. So why am I super jumping? I don't have to press down and then up. That's silly. I'll just press up at the end. And I was like, well, can I really just hold up? That seems dumb. And I'm like, God, that works. Like, what is this game? Just like jump cancels by holding up. Like, I actually kind of got mad for a minute. I was like, that's not a jump cancel. That's just you holding up. This is stupid. But it's funny how it is. I worked back the opposite way of doing extra inputs that I didn't need to do before. I was like, wait, there's no super jump canceling in this game. There should be. That'd be really cool. But just a little anecdote there. By the way, I will commend the latest version of Street Fighter V's Volume 2 combos. If you look in the trials, the Volume 2 trials, is that they include counter hit combos as well, which is just a nice touch of this is something that you can do. Doesn't necessarily even explain like what or when you would be looking for a counter hit light punch, but it does present a counter hit light punch, which is more than nothing.
I don't know how often you come across people with issues on execution, but me, I've become hyper aware of my inputs. I try to be as efficient as I can because I know that I have a lot more room to grow. But I wonder, because this is just me and I've never really observed anybody else doing it, but I wonder if other people are not like taking into account shortcut inputs. Like I've seen it from Gief's Gym. I think it was the first time I ever saw someone else mention like shortcut inputs because I never knew how to like research how to do a Hadouken efficiently. You know, I didn't know how to Google that. So how often do you come across people who are doing either sloppy or extra movement for their inputs?
I was actually thinking about this the other day, just in terms of the sub and the number of times I've seen this question come up, because the answer used to be fairly often. I would actually pretty often see people have the problem of, I really can't combo this crouching hard punch into a DP. And then the obvious answer was you just do the shortcut. You just go to down, forward, down, forward. Don't worry about it, kid. That was always it. that would come up. That question would come up so often. You could probably search and see a history of that. But recently, that's stopped. And I think it has to do a lot in part with Gief's Gym, just in general, because in any of the special inputs, it explains to you exactly this is how you would want to do this, or this is a potential shortcut for you. So I actually don't see that come up as often as I used to, because it used to come up all the time, especially in RSF4. People would ask that stuff all the time. Or another example is, I want to walk forward into and throw a fireball. And then we would continually have to answer that question of, just exaggerate your inputs or make sure you go to neutral, whatever. There's an answer for that. But since I've included it in Gief's Gym in the quarter circle forward lesson, I haven't seen that around in a very long time. So I think in that respect, it's really done its job. It was kind of one of those unseen things that I haven't really thought about in a while, but I haven't seen it. So I think at least around the stub, that problem's been assuaged for the time being, until probably a whole new set of people come in around AE and asking for, well, how do I do this? And then just point them towards that, and they should be taken care of. But
there you go.
But yeah, that was a problem that we did see a lot of people not even being aware that there are certain shortcuts.
So you seem like a person who values knowledge and learning and improvement and mastery, all that stuff. How do you continue to look for information that's going to help you get better or help other people get better?
It's funny you mentioned that, because this is something that I've been wanting to write about. This is going to be the final lesson on Gief's Gym. I have it in my head of what lesson I want to look forward. I want to close the book on. I think 60 lessons is, it's a lot of lessons to work off. There's a lot of information there, but I want the last one to be something that what is basically based on what is your drive to continue, and how do you have that drive to continue. But I think the true answer is that there are some people that just won't. This is not as important to them as to want to improve. And that is okay. Like that is fine to just to play the game and enjoy it and have that be just another fun thing in your life, because fighting games are just fun. They're fun to play with your friends and stuff like that. That is totally fine. If you want to be competitive, what level of competitive do you want to be? How serious do you want to get? Do you just want to beat your locals? Because if that's true, then technically you don't actually have to improve much better than the second best person in your local. And that's actually what kills a lot of locals, is that the person who's the best at a local will get as good as they have to be, not teach the second best person how to beat them, or not try and help out as much, and just take the pot every week. And then people stop wanting to feed the pot. It happens fairly often. Ask most small locals. You'll probably hear a similar story from a number of different tournament organizers. But is that the level that you want to play at? Do you want to take that any further? Because if you want to take it any further, you have to, if you want to escalate your skill in anything, you also have to escalate how much effort you're willing to put into pursuing that thing. And that is not just how much time you put in towards that thing, but how you build your life around it. If I wanted to become a competitive player, there are a lot of things that I just could not do. Because I don't have, currently with the schedule of my life, I don't have the time to fit in the required practice to become the best player. I just don't. It's not it. But if that's something that I wanted, I would have to change a lot of elements about my life to have that point towards becoming better. Now, what you're asking about is, do you want that mindset? And I feel like the answer is, and this might not even be what you were looking for, but the answer lies in not the heart of battle. The answer lies in what do you truly want for yourself. That was cheap. That was cheap. That was cheap and cheesy for me to say that quote. I'm sorry.
To end on, but I know you were excited for a few things. So that's the next question that I ask you is what are you excited for coming up?
I've already mentioned the third edition of Gief Gym. That's coming around the corner, probably around when AE comes out. I'm excited for AE, actually. I think a lot of people are excited for, if anyone that hasn't followed the news, Street Fighter V is getting an update. Street Fighter V AE, I think it's July. But I'm excited for that because it, hopefully, with the announcements that are coming for it, will solve a lot of the problems that the general fighting game enthusiast had with Street Fighter V. Now, there were so many things that I think I've spoken about this before. I can't remember. No, it's not in Gief Gym. It's just something that I shared on the sub, to where there has been a general consensus in the video game community at large. Like, you can just go look at Metacritic for Street Fighter V and do Control F lacking, and it's in almost every single review. It didn't have anything when it was launched. That's just the truth. And a lot of people who might be excited about fighting games decided it's not worth it to me because I'm not a competitive player. I think with AE, we have the opportunity now to bring a lot of those, I'm interested, but I'm not interested if it doesn't have anything in it. We could grab those people, and some of those people will turn over into the competitive communities. It happened with Street Fighter 4. It can happen again in AE. Netcode notwithstanding. But there's just, we lost out on that at the launch of Street Fighter V, and this is another chance to get that back. Get that casual player in and just saying, just people having fun with Street Fighter V on a very casual level. People who might want to watch EVO. They might want to watch, maybe not EVO, but go to another, or maybe not go to, but watch other events. Maybe support other smaller events. There's, without using the word, but a lot of that positivity around the launch of a new game could trickle down enough to smaller communities to boost the FGC at large. And this has nothing to do with corporate money. It's not like corporate trickle down economics here. It's just community enthusiasm trickle down of, if you have people excited about a thing, at some point it will get to the lower level of smaller FGC scenes, locals and scenes like that. So yeah. I'm excited for that, to see what can come of it. And also the more announcements that they're going to have. We all know it's coming, but I want to see what those V skills, V triggers, potentially new critical arts look like. I don't know. There's announcements coming, and that's exciting. Also, there's a ton of awesome fighting games coming out right now.
Yeah. I feel like the platinum age of fighting games is what it feels like, because there was a golden age or whatever, but this is there's so many good games that have come out. I like Infinite, genuinely. I genuinely like it. I like Street Fighter more and more now. I have fun and smile when I play it. Injustice was great. Tekken, I don't play it. I'd have no desire to play it, but I'm happy for the people who are happy to have it.
It's very fun and fun to watch. Yes.
Dragon Ball Fighters, Z, whatever. I enjoyed that game. I'm excited for it. I don't think, I'm glad to have more competition of tag style games. And speaking of tag, you got the cross tag of Blaze Blue. Tons of games. Man. Tons of games. You got Ruby and all the other characters from Ruby in it. You got Persona characters, Blaze Blue characters, and I think something else as well. Might be
Persona? Did you say Persona?
Yeah, Persona, Ruby, Blaze Blue, and I think there's some other obscure characters from other animes or games, perhaps. But nonetheless,
to be honest, to be clear, I don't really know anything about that game in general. But during EVO, that announcement was the hypest thing I've ever seen. Of that day, that was the hypest announcement. and I don't know shit about anime. Like, I don't know anything about those games. I don't play BlazBlue. BlazBlue finals were fantastic. Like, I went out when I got back and I was like, I'm going to play some BlazBlue. I have no idea how to play it. It's kind of like Guilty Gear, I imagine, because it's kind of the same teams and
such a good
there's
game.
a lot of it, which is also a great game. But I was like, yo, finals was dope. Let me play this new game that I've never played before. And also let me get excited about this thing that I hadn't, like, no one had any idea that I had no idea I wanted that game until it was announced. And now shoot, I'm an anime fan. What happened?
That's the great thing about the FGC. You don't have to stay in your little pocket. You can expand a little bit and like support games that you don't play, and then eventually you might play them, and then it's fantastic. So
yeah, I'm only going to be a casual player in those games.
Yeah, you don't have to be competitive. Like, just like
I plan on being competitive. Just have fun with it.
Yeah, like KI. I don't ever plan on playing it competitively, but this is funny. It was Yumacon? No, Frosty Faustings. I interviewed like Hollywood Sleep, who I had no clue who he was. This is the first time I ever interviewed him, and like a couple other people. And he wound up winning that tournament. But I was like learning about KI from a friend, like trying to understand like how the heck does this game work? Like, this game is weird. I don't get it. It's different. I don't like it. And so I just learned about it, and I wound up appreciating it a lot. And then the more I played it, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Now I love watching the tournaments and wound up becoming friends with someone who's like really, really good at the game. And it's pretty awesome. It's a good game. So now I always support games that I don't even play. I'm happy for people who are happy for them, because then I might get into it, and who knows, it's just all good. So.
Yeah, no, fighting games are awesome. I have another similar memory of that. Actually, it was Evo 2015, where I was going to sit with some people, and they were just getting seats before, I forget the order of things, but it was during Guilty Gear. They went to get seats, and they were like, I'm really like, what's happening here? And I was like, oh man, you've never played Guilty? You don't know how the systems of this game work? Let me break it down for you. And then by the end of me breaking it down for them, and then watching Guilty Gear Finals, at the end of it, they were excited about it. Because they could understand it and see it. And it just took that little bit of effort on their part to try and understand the thing, to go, oh man, now I get it. That's actually pretty hype. Yeah. I was like, yeah, Guilty Gear's hype. Hell yeah, it's hype. This game's awesome.
I will say two things. One, he probably had a good teacher explaining the game to him. And then two, I had Guilty Gear explained to him like 3 or 4 times by 4 different people. And it wasn't until the last person that I finally appreciated the game for what it was. So I was like, okay. The other 3 just explained it very poorly, because this is a really cool game. And they're just like, no, do this, do this, do this. I'm like, okay. So I think you had a lot to do with it, even though you're probably not going to give yourself credit.
Nah, probably not.
There's a good book that I highly recommend. It's pretty short, I think. It's called The First 20 Hours. It's either Josh Kaufman or Josh Four. I think it's Josh Kaufman. But he talks about learning a skill in about 20 hours. Like not becoming a master, but just getting decent at the skill, getting good at it enough to be able to move on. It takes about 20 hours or so to develop a skill, but it also has very specific processes in order to get a skill, to improve a skill with an efficient amount of time. He has a TED Talk. I can send that. I'll post it in the comments down below, as well as Gief Gym. But
as you're explaining this, I do recall you bringing this up in the past. I have watched that.
Okay. So when you write Gief's Gym, or you're trying to explain something to somebody else, obviously it's going to be pointed towards fighting games mainly. But when you're explaining this stuff and you're teaching it, how do you take into account like the process of learning, or do you only do it from your point of view?
Let's put it this way. When I wrote Gief's Gym initially, it was from the point of view, at least attempted point of view, of someone who has zero experience, cannot tell up from down or quarter circle from DP. That's just how it was written. I think going through that, let's put it this way. Before I had heard that TED Talk you were talking about, or listened to that, I haven't read the book yet, but before you had mentioned that, that's kind of how I approached learning a lot of skills. like that is legitimately, I think in the TED Talk, he learns how to play ukulele. Am I correct in saying? That's how I taught myself how to play ukulele. I got a little bit further from that, but that's kind of where it ended. But that's that small process of learning what you can. And I guess I kind of want to take a tangent here because one of the latest things I wrote about Gief was actually when you are learning something, I feel as though it is important to celebrate smaller victories. I think that's somewhat what that guy was trying to explain. Not really. It's not really on the point, but it is something that I feel like, especially in fighting games, is important to, and probably in most skills, is that you learn so much so fast and you never get to learn again. You learn how to do a tick throw, and that moment when you apply a tick throw in a match the first time and it works, you go, oh man, that worked. That's fantastic. Like, I taught myself how to do that. I practiced that and I did it. Or a whiff punish, setting up a whiff punish of, I'm going to be right out of range here, and I'm going to sweep him when he presses that button. And then you do it. The first time you do that, you will lose the round because of the excitement that you have for that one moment, and you can't think about anything else. Like you'll be so focused on, hell yeah, I did that awesome thing. Oh, I died? Ah, well, I did that thing. But that moment is so exciting, and you never get that. You might never get that back again. And I think it's important for newer players, especially, to say, oh, I did that one thing. I tried. That was the one thing I focused on, and I was able to accomplish it. You can congratulate. You can congratulate yourself over that. You might not be. It might not raise you in ranks. You might not have a number to prove it, and you might not actually be a good player. You probably aren't. You probably still suck. That's fine. But you at least improved in that one part of the skill that you were focusing on. And I think it's important to celebrate that small victory. But to your point, I do somewhat believe in the learning a skill in 20 hours is definitely doable. It's just, how good at Googling things are you, at least in this day and age?
There's very few people who do this. There's another person, I watch, Seth Killian. He's really good at doing this as well. But how, as you're learning the concepts of the game and improving, and I might already know the answer to this, but I want to hear your point of view. How do you remain conscious of the fact that not everyone knows the same amount of information as you get more skilled? If you don't understand what I'm saying, then I can elaborate a little bit more.
Oh no, this is abundantly clear. At least as Zangief main. I feel like I don't get to play much on stream very often, but times that I do, there's probably a history of me playing against a player. I'll SPD him 2 times in a row and say out loud, he has to jump. He has to jump this one. And I'll dash up and do another SPD and it'll work. And I'll be like kicking myself. That shouldn't have worked. I'll say to myself, you shouldn't be losing to this. Start thinking, like, what are you doing? Or another anecdote on that, specifically in this last Evo. Person I lost to in my pools, I lost to a Ken who I can objectively say didn't do any of the Ken stuff that more skilled Ken players will do. They didn't go for a single throw bait. They hardly ever anti-aired. But it was the fact that I got in my own head about it of they have to DP me this time. I can't just do a jump in medium kick and expect it to work. That's a dumb decision to do from this range. I took that into thinking. I was in my own head, definitely. It was not a good mind space. And I lost to this Ken player. And I thought, damn, man, like, I must like really suck for losing to a Ken who I know is pretty objectively bad. And then in the next round, he went on to face LPN, and then LPN lost to that same Ken. And I think we were both in the same mindset of, he'll have to do the Ken thing next, because if you're here playing and you play Ken, you should do the Ken things that Ken does. You should follow up certain knockdowns with certain things and just be aware of things that Ken can do. Like, just, and it made me think, like, maybe he was actually really good. Maybe he just needed to play his game and we weren't playing his game. Another good example of that actually is and I think I'll include this on probably my next, I don't know, I'll work this into my podcast at some point, but specifically the FSP versus Gandhi match at DreamHack. Oh, shoot, where was it? It was a DreamHack. FSP versus Gandhi. Look it up if you haven't watched it already. But it is a Rufus player playing against a Ryu player, Gandhi, and Gandhi very clearly doesn't know how to play. He knows the moves. He can do the moves. He can't combo. He doesn't know anything about the game. And you see FSP continually going for Rufus stuff of throw baits, and he's doing dive kick after dive kick. He's not trying to bait a DP, because 100% of the time on block, this Ryu player is mashing DP. 100% of the time. Almost all the time. There's a point where he doesn't, which I think is like valuable to talk about in terms of how that match went, which I'll get into at a later date. But always mashing. And the Rufus player didn't adapt because he expected his opponent to be at a certain level. And it is, at some point, you just have to play this. You have to live in the moment, play the situation, and play smarter. And I think there's a lot of times where we as players just forget about that. At least I have. I've been there.
Makes sense to me. And I actually know I know the Ken player you're talking about. Yeah, I saw that match, but I didn't see your match, but I saw the LPN one, and I was like, he lost to this guy? I remember thinking
yes,
that. I remember thinking that.
It was wild. I couldn't believe it. Like, it made me think later. It made me question, like, was he actually good? Or, like, what happened? It shook me to my core. Made me question God himself. I'm not trying to throw shade. Like, I played very poorly. I recognize that. Not trying to throw shade at all, but that's just, I think, an example of what can happen sometimes when you overestimate your opponent's abilities.
Yeah. I had this a guest on called his name was Paul Harrison. He talked a lot about meditation, and he talked about mental rigidity and how sometimes we get a certain idea in our head of how things are supposed to go. And what you're describing kind of sounds like that, with like maybe even LPN, but you as well. Like, this is how I'm going to play. This is how this person should play. And no matter what, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not saying you always do that, but that's kind of, it made me think about that a little bit. The other question kind of related to what we just talked about, what you just talked about, was when you're teaching somebody else, you try to assume as if they don't know anything about fighting games. But something I've observed as I talk to people who are in differing skills is a lot of times they don't realize how much they know about like fighting games and how much other people don't know, and they explain it as if like you should already know A, B, and C, when in fact they don't even know A yet. Mm-hmm. I think you're one of the few people that does a good job of being able to convey all the ideas that other people like tend to leave out. And this is not just a fighting game thing. A lot of people who are highly skilled in other areas, like especially military, people who put in long hours of training, they're not always the best at explaining how to do something. They're best at doing it, but not always like how to break down each individual step, because it's embodied in them. It's like asking someone how do you breathe? You don't, you just do it. That's kind of where they are with that. So how do you stay so, I guess one, do you struggle with that, being able to explain something and not missing any steps? But two, if you seem like you do a good job, how do you, stay aware of that? How do you stay aware of what they don't know?
How do you stay aware? That's actually not something that I've thought about. It's something that I think I naturally do when I try to teach players. When I used to go one-on-one with people, it would be, I would intentionally do something that was punished. Well, let's put it this way. because I've seen it from both ends, especially in fighting games. I've seen situations where you're in training mode with the person you're trying to teach, and you do something intentional. Let's say you do something punishable, and your opponent, let's say the trainee who's trying to learn, doesn't punish it. The bad teacher will say, "Oh, punish that. That's punishable," and then stop there. What I would always do would say, "Okay, stop. What I just did there was punishable. Did you recognize what I did?" I would ask them, "Did you recognize what I just did?" And I said, and a lot of the times they would say, "Oh, what? No." Because they weren't even thinking about the thing that I just did. They were thinking about the thing that they were going to do, because fighting games are so fast-paced, so high-paced, that especially as a new player, you only have the mental capacity to think about your own controls. You hardly ever look at the other player, at least when you are brand new to fighting games. So I go, okay, we're going to stop. I'm going to do the thing that I just told you was punishable. Here it is, boom. And more often than not, they just don't block it. And you go, okay, well, block this. I go, okay, see that? See when you block that? Okay, I recover slower. You actually have time to act before I recover. And just walking through, okay, what is a punish even? They go, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I get that. And they might agree with you as if they understand it, and they might understand it, but saying it is important. Reiterating is important. It's like why even like simple instructions for anything. I think if you look anywhere, there's very simplified instructions of do 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's always listed, even though you just know, okay, I just do the thing. But it's important to explain things of, okay, well, I've blocked that sweep now. And then I tell them it's punishable. And then I tell them, well, how to punish it. And they go, okay, yeah, I can punish that with that button. And then you have to physically practice it of, okay, you're going to block my sweep. Now you do this. And then they might not do it the first couple times. And by the third time, they might actually do it. And it's just so important because if I just said at the very start of it, do this, they block a sweep, and then I just say, oh, that's punishable. I've seen that, like the stopgap between, okay, they didn't even know what I did that was punishable. So now that they know it, they might know it's punishable, but they might not know what button to press. They might know that it's punishable. They might know what button to press, but they might not know when to press it. And then going through all of those steps, 1 to 4, to hop all the way to, okay, we're actually practicing it now. Okay, there's your punish. Boom, you did it. That's one thing that you can punish now that you spent 5 minutes learning. And that 5 minutes is worthwhile because they know that now. And they know the timing of it now. They know how to execute it now. They've gone through the whole process of seeing the thing, reacting to the thing, executing the thing. It is, in a lot of ways, that's what a lot of fighting games is seeing a thing, reacting to the thing, or recognizing the thing, executing on that thing. Not always. Sometimes a lot of things are preemptive, or sometimes things can be preemptive, which you don't typically want to get into with newer players because they're not thinking, or at least they don't have the mental capacity to think ahead because of how much mental energy they're expending on so many other things. Like, you don't want to get into existential stuff when you're teaching new players. You just want to talk about the basics. So like, that's when I said, like, when you just teach someone how to punish a thing, you have to go through all of the steps. Even though that might take 5 minutes, it's valuable 5 minutes to spend instead of just assuming that they know what a punish is, even if they know what a punish is.
To somewhat add on to that, understanding their competency level is very helpful. Because if, depending on how I'm sure they would react differently depending on their level of skill. If they knew what a punish was, like, oh, okay, well, their question would be, well, what's my optimal punish? If they didn't know what a punish was, they probably would be like, unless they had ego in the way and lied about it, they'd be like, well, what do I even do? What is a punish? And so just the fact of stopping and addressing one thing and being able to break that down, again, very complex, the car analogy, doing multiple things disguised as one whole action. You can break down where they are and really fine tune the training for that individual, because if they're already well aware. You just need to tell them, they'll find the timing fairly well as long as you let them know what to press, or you might have to break it down. So yeah, I think that's very well said. If you break it down, if you stop, know where they are. It's pretty easy to stay conscious, I think.
I think as a teacher, it's important to recognize all of the steps that lead up to something. I actually don't think it's important to understand all of those steps as a player. You actually don't have to go through all of these motions to become a good player. You don't. To be a good teacher, it's a different thing. It's a different mindset. If you're trying to teach someone a thing, you have to think to the core of how you got to that moment. And a lot of players forget about it. It's actually fun because I actually got a lot of shit for it. But when initially writing most of Gief's Gym, is that prime example, and I got this all the time writing the character supplements, was the second lesson in Gief's Gym is anti-airs. We don't get to special attacks in Gief's Gym until lesson 7. Lesson 7 is when you start combining motions with button presses. It takes 7 lessons to get there. So when I did all the character supplements, I never listed a single special move as an anti-air for all 3 ranges, for the normal range, the close range, and the far out range. I didn't include a single special move, even if a certain special move would be better to use at the range where someone would be jumping in on you. So I would say 70% of the time, for 70%, if not like 70 to 90% of all of the character discussions or character supplements posted, there would be one comment that was, DP is a better anti-air in this situation. And I have to say, I agree. You're right. A DP is a better anti-air in that situation. However, new players, to a brand new player that doesn't know how to anti-air, they don't know how to do a special move yet. They might jump ahead and learn their special move, but they're not even thinking about what range your opponent's jumping from to think about the button you might want to press in that situation. Not thinking about how someone's jumping from, because you would still get players saying, he jumped from close range, what do I do? And then say, go to part 3 of anti-airs. You have to respond to it differently. You can't just DP in that situation because it'll whiff entirely. And I saw it so often where more advanced players would say, just tell them to DP. It's a better anti-air. It anti-airs everything. And I say, yes, of course it does. You know that because you've been playing the player. You've been playing that character. I know that because I played against that character. I know that's a good anti-air. Everyone who plays that character or against that character knows that's a good anti-air, but I can't include it because the steps that a new player is going to take to learn how to play a fighting game, we haven't gotten there yet. They might have jumped ahead. They might already know it, but it's important to recognize that you can do without special moves, and you're not even... The point is that you're not even looking to react with a special move. You'll get there eventually if you combine everything together at the end of it, like you're probably supposed to, taking in the collection of Gief's Gym as a whole to say, oh, now I know what a special move is. I remember anti-airing. I'll just combine those two. And you put it all together, and now you're a better player. Now you know how to play that character because you taught yourself how to do it based on the lessons that you've learned already. So I think that is a good example of how certain players at a certain level are actually terrible teachers because they haven't thought about the entirety of the process of new players aren't even looking to shut down people who jump in because they don't know to ask themselves that question yet. Or that happens very fast. They will learn immediately, I know I need to know how to stop them from jumping in. People will recognize that in themselves, but also not know how to answer that question. But specifically with the section on anti-airs, which is lesson 2, it comes well before you learn any special moves. And I thought that it was important to maintain that throughout the character supplements, to never include a special in that because of it breaks the order.
the teacher's mentality does have to be different, and it makes me think about playing sports and like karate and boxing. And more often than not, they would just have me do something repeatedly over and over again. Me not knowing as a young Tavian, as a young philosopher, that I was building a strong foundation to learn other skills. And it wasn't until they saw that I was good enough in these basic things to move on to something else. And I didn't understand that, and I would get frustrated. But like over the years of doing these different things, I got good at stuff, and I was like, I didn't even understand it. Like my understanding and proficiency of like being able to throw a kick very accurately, like I thought that was just natural skill, and I didn't realize it was just built on foundation of my teacher making me do kicks as slow as possible, as accurately as possible, over and over again. It wasn't until years later that I realized the impact of training, but also having a teacher or instructor or sensei that has you build that strong foundation. So I definitely think that, yeah, things like Gief's Gym or teachers or trainers that have them do the process, that'll build the skills for them to be able to do the things that, you know, they want to do. They don't always necessarily have to understand them as a player. Mm-hmm. I think it can be beneficial as long as they don't get analysis paralysis per se. But yeah, they don't have to. It's kind of an interesting. I never really thought about it from my point of view, but that is very true. But I think there are still great players who do also happen to be good teachers, but that's a different topic altogether.
Mm-hmm. I'm not one of them.
Don't worry. But no, I think that's a good note to end it on. Of course, I want to thank you. But let the people know if you have anything else going on or where they can find you. I'll put links to all the things down below if I can get these words out of my mouth. But mm-hmm. Yeah, right?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Super Joe Monday, all one word, or you can find me on our Street Fighter user Joe_Monday, MUNDAY. Not like the day, slightly different, but that's where you can find me. I'm pretty much always up and available. Typically very quick to answer any and all questions. Drop it in any thread that I'm in, or coming up, actually, announcements, which we haven't talked about yet, but Extra Life Stream is coming up on November 4th, so that's in a couple days, doing a charity stream here for the Children's Miracle Network. It's going to, all the money goes towards kids. I don't touch any of it, just goes straight to the charity. That's a 24-hour stream where I think I'll be doing some teaching there at some point, but not doing all fighting games all the time, because that sounds like I don't think that's mentally possible to do straight 24 hours fighting games. That would be too much. Mm-hmm. I don't have enough Gatorade with me to replenish myself enough to do that. Yeah. So that's coming up. And also running we have a podcast now. RSF Radio is a thing that goes up on Thursday nights, Friday mornings. You can find that on any device that you use to listen to podcasts. Search RSF Radio and it should come up.
Thank you so much for joining. As always, it's always great to talk to you. I get excited and I talk really fast because it's good to talk about this kind of stuff to me. But that said, I want to thank the viewers for tuning in and watching this show. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and you'll get updates on more. Also, let us know what you guys thought about what we talked about down below. Leave a comment and get that conversation going. That said, thank you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one.